If you're anything like me, you've probably seen almost every police body cam video out there. Once you get started, they become super addicting, and at times they really are just some of the most enticing pieces of disturbing media that we have. But believe it or not, there's still a select few that, despite having incredibly heartbreaking stories, have gotten virtually zero coverage. And today, I'm going to tell you about one of them. Now, if you have seen this video, there's a great chance you still don't know the backstory or any of the recent updates, so I still think you'll find those interesting. And on top of this, I've decided to make volume 40 minutes long, and I have another 7 stories for you that you've probably never heard. So I'll tell you everything, but as usual, let's get into the backstories first. Brandon Durham was a 43-year-old man from Las Vegas who worked in real estate. He was a father to a teenage daughter, Isabella, and he absolutely adored her. Friends later said their bond was unbreakable. And of course, being a real estate agent, his job kept him busy, but in this case, he was at least able to provide for the people that he loved, mainly his daughter. Life, however, isn't always simple. Like many people, Brandon had his challenges. There were rumors of financial stress and some past struggles, but nothing that overshadowed his devotion to his daughter and work, or at least it didn't seem that way. Now, the timeline of events that precede the very serious situation we're about to discuss is a little messy, but by piecing everything together, including arrest reports, we can see that it all begins around November 10th, 2024, with a casual sex partner that Brandon was seeing, 31-year-old Alejandra Boudreau. This relationship had been ongoing for a while, but at some point along the way, things got problematic and Brandon decided to cut it off. Alejandra was booked on a flight out of Vegas, but it was canceled because it was booked on a stolen credit card, and so she just returned to Brandon's home, remained there, and refused to leave, as she didn't have anywhere to go. Brandon knew this, and that's why he even allowed her to stay with him for a while, but he eventually had to put the foot down and cut off the relationship altogether, hence that flight that eventually never happened. So again, when she returned, she basically just refused to leave Brandon's house, and because of this, on the night of November 11th, 2024, the police were called to Brandon's home based on a trespassing complaint that he made. Officers responded and talked to Brandon outside the residence before entering and trying to get her to leave.
Friend was in a bad spot. Got kicked out of another house.
How long has you been here?
1 day. And I said they were going to leave today. And then they were like, I'm not leaving. Make me leave and stuff like that. And I'm like, all right, I'm not getting into a fight like that. Well, that guys could leave and call the cops.
Huh? I'm not supposed to answer the door. Are you sure? Okay, so now you're here.
Okay, man, well, we'll just hang out while you grab your stuff if you're gonna head out.
Order me an Uber?
We don't do that.
Want to do it after the courtesy or?
No.
She tried to ask him for an Uber and it didn't work, but eventually she was just escorted out and I guess somehow managed to get one because she did leave. Brandon then thanked the officers for the peaceful resolution and police were on their way. And in a perfect world, this would have been the end of it, but it wasn't, as Alejandro would return to his home just hours later, setting into motion an absolutely horrible tragedy that no one could have ever imagined. Shortly after midnight on November 12th, 2024, so just hours later, Brandon called 911 again, and this time his voice was filled with sheer panic.
And you said you didn't know them, right? Okay, did you see them at all?
They get shot. Someone poked their head out there. I'm gonna kill everybody. It's okay.
In the recording, we can hear him talking about how 2 people are outside of his house shooting and attempting to break in. But in hindsight, we know it was actually Alejandra throwing bricks at his window. It's unclear if there was ever actually a second person. Later in the call, you can hear him telling the dispatcher that there was someone now in the house wearing a red hoodie.
You said hoodies. Do you know what colors?
Wait.
Both of them are in red hoodies?
While Brandon was pleading for help, the situation inside his home grew even more volatile. Boudreau had entered and armed herself with a large knife from his kitchen, and according to police reports and later statements, she didn't want to leave the interaction still breathing. She just wanted to make a huge mess of his house and leave him with the disaster. But Brandon didn't know that. All he knew was that there was a very familiar armed intruder in his home, while his child was just a few feet away. Officers from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department rushed to the scene, among them 26-year-old officer Alexander Bookman. He'd been on the force for just 3 years. Upon arrival, they found the front door locked and could hear shouting from the inside, so Bookman kicked the door open and stepped inside with his body camera rolling. What happened next is just incomprehensible. In one of the hallways, Bookman saw 2 people struggling. Brandon was holding Alejandra, who had the knife, up against the wall. The officer shouted, "Drop the knife," twice, and then, not even 2 seconds later, Bookman fired one shot, and it wasn't at Alejandra, it was at Brandon, the victim of the home invasion, and the man whose daughter was inside of the house.
Hey, drop the knife! Drop the knife!
Both fell to the floor, and instead of reassessing, the officer just walked up and fired 5 more times into Brandon as he was clearly no longer a threat. Boudreaux, the perpetrator, was not hit. She even said, "You shot the wrong person." Alejandra was taken into custody at the scene and later charged with multiple felonies, some unrelated, but this includes home invasion, assault with a deadly weapon, child endangerment, and arson. Brandon, the man who called for help, passed away where he fell. Paramedics couldn't save him. After the event, officials revealed that no firearms were found in the home, only 2 knives, one of which was a weapon involved in the struggle. The backlash was of course immediate, and Brandon's family accused police of using reckless and unnecessary force. His daughter Isabella gave a heartbreaking statement that said, "They'll allow me to live fatherless for the rest of my life." Now, to me personally, especially after watching Dr. Todd Grande's breakdown, it's very evident that this was poor conduct on behalf of Officer Bookman. I mean, let's break this down. The officer enters, sees Brandon pinning the knife against the wall behind Alejandra, and then demands the knife to be dropped. He gives him no time to drop the knife though, as just under 2 seconds later, he discharges his service weapon at Brandon. After this, the knife is dropped, both of them are on the ground, and Brandon is clearly no longer a threat. But yet Bookman walks up to him and fires at him 5 more times. Brandon was also in his underwear, indicating he's a victim. He was 35 pounds lighter than Alejandra, and we can hear Brandon tell dispatchers prior to this that his aggressor was in a red hoodie. On top of all this, Bookman was allegedly one of the officers who responded to this earlier call, and if this is the case, he should have better recognized who was who. No matter what you make of this situation, if you want to defend the officer, I don't understand how Brandon was supposed to follow any command under such circumstances when given under 2 seconds. Even if he was the perp, this would be an impulsive decision. And perhaps the biggest question is, why did he walk up and fire 5 more shots after Brandon was clearly immobilized? Lethal force was already used as the first hit was into his cranium. Now, there are some other alleged factors here that would be made clear in later reports that propose some more questionable details about Brandon himself, and this information didn't come out until later, so I'm just trying to tell this all chronologically. Toxicology reports later showed that there was methamphetamine in his system, and police say they found pills and drug paraphernalia inside the house. Now, that's one thing, but additionally, it was said that 5 hours after this incident, another unidentified woman was found in his house by a crime scene analyst, and she was behind a couch. She claimed that prior to the incident, she was brought over to Brandon's, he gave her a drink that tasted funny, and then she passed out, only regaining consciousness hours later around 6 a.m. when the crime scene analyst was there. These came out in arrest reports, but I have not seen any updates on this, and I suspect it'll be touched on again in more detail in the full report. But this also confirms that police did not fully clear the residence before leaving, another key detail. All of this arrest report information adds yet another disturbing layer to an already complex case, but it still does not change the fact that the officer, in my opinion, acted poorly. The Clark County District Attorney's Office is still currently conducting a full review. They're examining the physical evidence and policy guidelines on use of force. Historically, most police shootings in this county have been ruled justified. Officer Bookman remains on paid administrative leave, and the Las Vegas Police Protective Association has defended him, claiming he acted within policy and believed his life was in danger. The fact that Brandon Durham's death has remained so local is genuinely weird to me, considering how many crazy details there are to it, and the fact that most Bodycam releases of this nature have been discussed ad nauseum already. It's the reason I don't usually cover them. Most people have already seen most of them. But nonetheless, that's where the case stands today. It's still relatively recent, and I'll certainly keep an eye on this and patiently wait for the full report. I just feel really bad for Brandon's daughter above everyone here, and I genuinely hope the poor girl can work through such a traumatic situation. I can't even begin to imagine what she was experiencing while she was locked inside the room. There's currently a lot of talk online and in the news about cover-ups, and that's for obvious reasons. I've actually been watching a lot on this, but in this entry, I'm going to be discussing an alleged cover-up that you more than likely have never heard. And that's probably for a good reason, but we'll get there. It's important to note before I get into this that I am strictly documenting publicly available information, and any additional opinions I might make should be regarded as just that, opinion.
Okay, recording.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sheu. I have submitted evidence to the FBI. Recently, FBI returned me a copy of the evidence.
This is Sun Ming Sheu, otherwise known as Sunny. Like many others, he came to the United States from Taiwan chasing stability and opportunity. He settled in Queens, New York, and lived a quiet life in his neighborhood of Flushing. Friends and family described him as hardworking and determined, but as someone who usually kept to himself. Sunny also adamantly believed in fairness, though, and this belief would set him on a path that ultimately ended in a very confusing tragedy. In the early 2000s, Sheu purchased a home, which is a dream for any immigrant trying to build a future. But after a series of events, this dream became a nightmare. Sheu eventually claimed that his property was stolen through fraudulent means involving forged signatures and questionable mortgage documents. Let me explain. Back in 2001, Sunny lost his home to foreclosure after Tower Insurance moved in on a mortgage he held with Centex Home Equity. Sheu insisted the foreclosure was rooted in mortgage fraud, pointing to a forged power of attorney, which is a legal document, at the center of the dispute. According to him, individuals tied to this document had already faced arrest for similar things, and then eventually they were arrested for Sheu's case. The case landed in the courtroom of Justice Joseph Golia of Queens Supreme Court, who later ruled in favor of Centex, not Sheu, through a summary judgment. And by July 21, 2004, Sunny's property was officially foreclosed. But this only sent him deeper down the rabbit hole, and after that, he would not let this matter drop. He kept pursuing legal options and, along the way, began looking into Justice Joseph Golia's own real estate profile, and he claimed to uncover inconsistencies between the judge's actual holdings and what appeared on his official ethics filings. Again, these allegations were against a Supreme Court judge who ruled against him, and now Sunny was claiming corruption. Sunny accused Golia of failing to disclose hundreds of thousands of dollars in real estate holdings, of course violating judicial ethics. He filed complaints with the New York State Commission on Judicial Conduct, reached out to federal authorities, and posted documentation online. This was a process that unraveled over a number of years. There were alleged threats, a lot of research and claims by Sunny, and a lot of back and forth. He even said that he was once kidnapped by detectives and told that if he brought this case to the media, he would be taken out. And then in 2009, Sunny recorded a video alleging that if anything happened to him, it would be because of Justice Joseph Golia and the people he was exposing. He didn't leave this to interpretation, he literally said it on camera.
For the security concern, I make this recording. And if anything wrong goes to me, it should be come from Judge Gloria and his people, because before I have been kidnapping by his people.
Despite this, he of course didn't back down. He wrote letters to the FBI, filed Freedom of Information requests, and even spoke to journalists about what he believed was systemic corruption within the state court system. And then came June 26, 2010. That morning, Sunny Sheu called a journalist he trusted, leaving a voicemail and saying he had just spoken to the FBI. And he sounded hopeful, almost like in his own mind, progress had finally started to be made. But then, things took a horrifying twist. Hours later, Sunny was found unconscious on the side of a road outside of a warehouse in College Point, Queens. He was rushed to a hospital where he was pronounced deceased shortly after. The first explanation given by authorities was that Sunny had collapsed from a seizure or aneurysm. But the hospital's CT scan reportedly said something else: blunt force trauma to the head. You'd think this alone would have triggered a criminal investigation and a mandatory autopsy, but it didn't. The NYPD classified the death as non-suspicious, and the case was closed without further inquiry. The medical examiner's office later said it never received an autopsy request from the police. There were no detailed public statements, no homicide inquiry, and no press conference. For a man who had spent years documenting what he alleged were threats to his life and fraudulent acts, oftentimes publicly, there was very little coverage on this. Black Star News did follow his story before and after his death, and The Independent would touch on it, but other than that, really there was nothing. It seems more people believe the official narrative, and I'm not even saying I don't. I'm totally not saying that. But there seems to have at least been a clear cause for deeper investigation here. Sunny Sheu's warnings while he was alive were very clear, and his evidence was well documented. And yet, when the moment came that should have validated every concern he raised, it was mostly just brushed aside. It became the responsibility of independent journalists and activists to piece the story together from scattered public records and personal testimonies. Over a decade later, the case remains very obscure and has only further been lost to time. Not that it ever got much attention anyways. There's a lot more specific details in this one. It honestly could have an entire video to it, but that's the story in summary. Also, thank you so much to the commenter who pointed this out to me in my last video. I had this in my list months ago, and I'm glad I finally got around to it. At first, April 4th, 1991 was just like any other Thursday in Sacramento. People were out and about, businesses were opening as usual, and one of them, the Good Guys electronics store on Stockton Boulevard, opened its doors to a very steady flow of customers, with employees busy helping shoppers pick out TVs and the latest home gadgets from the early 90s. This was actually a pretty popular spot. It was just a short drive from Florida Mall, and on this spring afternoon, no one could have imagined that they were about to become part of one of the most insane hostage situations in US history. So again, from the beginning, the day was going completely as usual, but at around 1:30 p.m., the calm shattered when 4 armed men stormed through the entrance. They wore ski masks, carried handguns along with a shotgun, and shouted orders as terrified shoppers froze in place. The assailants were soon identified as brothers Loy, Pham, and Long Nguyen, ages 21, 19, and 17 respectively. The fourth assailant was their friend, 17-year-old Quang Tran. All were Vietnamese immigrants who had come to America as children after the war, and now, years later, they were at the center of a siege that would grip the entire country. So at first, this break-in actually just looked like a robbery. The men demanded cash, but things escalated immediately. They herded about 40 people, men, women, and even kids, towards the front of the store. This was intentional, and it obviously wasn't hidden from view. The entire scene was visible to the growing crowd outside, and soon even TV cameras started broadcasting live to Northern California. Within minutes, Sacramento County Sheriff's deputies were on the scene, setting up perimeters while the captors inside grew more agitated. And it just gets really intense. Their demands began to spiral. They were asking for things like $4 million, bulletproof vests, and even a helicopter to fly them to Thailand afterwards. At one point, the men even demanded a line to speak directly to President George H.W. Bush. And so what looked at first like just a robbery had turned into an unpredictable standoff. People inside were absolutely terrified. Like, some of these accounts we're going to get into are insane. For the next several hours, negotiators tried to keep the gunmen calm. They'd offer things like food and water in exchange for hostages, and some progress was made. Some women and children were released early on, but inside the conditions were still absolutely brutal. Hostages described being threatened, forced to lie down, and repeatedly told that they would be taken out if demands weren't met. And for those trapped inside, every minute felt like a lifetime. And by nightfall, the ordeal had stretched past 8 hours. Negotiators kept talking, hoping to wear the men down, but inside, things were getting even worse. And to me, this is one of the most psychologically awful things imaginable. At around 9:40 p.m., the suspects started playing a sick game of chance where they would flip coins to decide who would live and who would be shot, basically picking the order. So they divided them into 2 groups and then would flip a coin to decide the order of execution when they began firing. One guy even offered to get fired at in the leg in order to gain freedom. This actually happened, and then he ended up pulling himself out and running to safety.
I just shoot 3 of them, 4 of them, Danny. I told you. Shoot them on the leg right now, and then I'll ask you again. You say no, I kill them.
There are 4 gunmen and good guys holding approximately 20 people hostage. They want 3 bulletproof jackets, a helicopter, and firearms. They already shot me. That's all I have to say.
Things were just getting too intense at this point, and they had to do something, and so commanders outside gave the green light. Tactical teams positioned at the front and back of the store, and the plan was that one of the snipers was set to take out one of the hostage takers from the front, and when the glass shattered, that would distract them, so then the others could enter from the back. That's exactly what happened. However, because of the thickness of the glass, that first shot didn't actually hit the intended perpetrator. Still, they moved forward anyways. They began throwing flashbang grenades, and just before 10 p.m., SWAT officers charged through the shattered glass and stormed from the rear, engaging the gunmen in a chaotic exchange that lasted less than a minute, but felt like forever for those inside. And when the smoke cleared, 3 of the 4 captors were deceased, Quang Tran and Pham and Long Nguyen. Loy Nguyen survived and was taken into custody. In 1995, he was sentenced to 49 consecutive life terms. And unlike the last 3 hostage cases that I've discussed, the cost here was pretty devastating. 3 hostages lost their lives in the final assault, and there were 11 people wounded, 10 of which were gunshots, and the 11th was actually a pregnant woman who experienced complications that resulted in the loss of her young one. The survivors stumbled out in complete shock. Some of them were barefoot, some of them had their clothes torn, and the Good Guys store, which was once a place for electronics and weekend shopping, now looked like a literal war zone. Reporters on live TV tried to make sense of the carnage as law enforcement began securing the scene, but it was now night and so it was a bit more difficult. And I think this comment that I found under one of the videos says it all. I was a paramedic in Sacramento and I was at this scene. I had my family watch this on in an instant so they could see what happened. The manager that jumped through the shattered door and runs off screen to the left was grabbed by police, put in a police car, run around the building, and put in the back of my ambulance. 15 years in the field, and this was the most terrified person I've ever seen. He sat there stunned with his fist clenched and just kept repeating, "I have the key, I have the key." He must have had it in his hand, and I tried to let him know he was safe now, but you could hear all the shooting. He wasn't in my ambulance long before the police came and got him, so we were free to treat the injured. And by the way, this is just a personal pet peeve. The medics and EMTs who coordinated the EMS response and treated all the patients were from private ambulance companies, not the fire department. All fire did was set up a triage area. I guess it just irks me because we heard news stories for days about what a good job the fire department did. In the weeks that followed, Sacramento struggled to process the severity of what had happened. At the time, it was the largest hostage rescue operation in U.S. history, and it set off a firestorm of debate. Some survivors and family members questioned why police waited so long to act, and they argued that hesitation gave the gunmen more time to kill. Officials defended their decisions, saying that storming the building earlier could have led to even greater loss of life, and many people took different sides. Investigations into the incident prompted law enforcement agencies nationwide to reevaluate hostage negotiation protocols and SWAT deployment strategies. This would be a massive lesson nonetheless. Now, this case was very, very well known when it happened, especially in America and in California specifically, but I've noticed that nobody really talks about it anymore. I couldn't find any documentaries online regarding this, but I could find old TV shows that covered it, and this compelled me to touch on it. For the victims and their families, the scars obviously never fully healed, and the families of the slain hostages still live with the what-ifs of that night, and for Sacramento, April 4th, 1991 stands as a reminder of how quickly an ordinary day can spiral into one of the darkest chapters in the city's history. The video you're seeing was taken last year in southwest Louisiana, and it was recorded just after a helicopter crashed. Despite the devastating story behind it, this case has remained extremely local, and trying to find anything about it on YouTube turns up almost nothing. But that's why I'm here, so let me explain to you what led up to this horrifying footage. Jared Savant was a well-liked guy in Kinder, Louisiana. He was 50 years old, sold cars, and outside of work, he had really just built his life around family and the things he enjoyed. One of those things was aviation. Flying wasn't his profession, but it was a serious passion for Jared. Over the years, he had dedicated time to learning how to operate helicopters. He would spend hours in training and on hands-on experience, and by 2024, he had logged about 139 hours of flight time in Robinson R-44 helicopters, including roughly 15 hours at night. His wife and those who knew her described her as devoted to her family and just an incredible person, and the couple had a young daughter together who had just turned 2 years old. Again, from everything that I could find, life seemed to be very family-oriented for them. Jared also has another adult daughter and countless family members who he loved very dearly. Unfortunately, though, things were about to take a very dark turn for him. On the evening of November 1st, 2024, Jared and his 2 passengers were getting ready for what was supposed to be a pretty routine trip. He'd actually recently bought his own 2006 Robinson R-44, which is a 4-seat helicopter commonly used for private flights, and a model I always seem to come across in these helicopter accidents I cover, but that's probably just because they're very common. That day, they started their flight by leaving from private property near Kinder at about 6:13 p.m., and then they flew toward a location called Lake Charles. They landed there for roughly 2 hours and enjoyed their time before taking off again at 8:54 p.m., heading north. For Jared, this was just an absolute dream to be able to do, really. I mean, it gave him this newfound freedom and he could just not get enough of it. This trip in particular didn't seem unusual to anyone who knew Jared. He was very comfortable around helicopters. But there was a critical issue here, one that investigators would later confirm, and one that I have not told you yet. Jared actually only had a student pilot certificate and did not hold a medical certificate, which the FAA requires for solo flying and carrying passengers. Student pilots are not allowed to transport passengers and are prohibited from flying at night without an instructor. This flight therefore violated those rules on multiple counts. And so when they were done at Lake Charles, the helicopter climbed and began heading north. Radar data shows that the final leg of the flight lasted just a few minutes, and at some point during this, its altitude started to fluctuate. And then horribly, at around 9 p.m., the helicopter dropped rapidly from the sky and crashed near Hecker Road, north of the town of Iowa. And yes, unlike the actual state, this town in Louisiana is pronounced Iowa. The exact reason for the accident has not been released yet as far as I can see, as the investigation is still ongoing and is expected to take about a year. This is where things get quite a bit darker though. When I told you he was with 2 other people, these weren't instructors or friends, which in itself would be tragic, but rather the 2 passengers with him in the accident were his wife and his 2-year-old daughter. And this very detail just makes this entire thing so much more heartbreaking, to be honest. It adds a whole different layer to the already eerie feeling I get when I see this footage. And I know people will be quick to pass judgment. After all, he did go against regulations, but remember guys, there are innocent people involved in this, and it's very recent. There are people with a lot of family members who were loved by everyone in their community, and out of respect for their privacy, I won't share anything, but seeing their Facebook posts made me really upset. I just try to be a lot more cautious when things are recent like this, and again, the full report hasn't even come out yet. As we can see in the video, emergency responders arrived to find the wreckage fully engulfed in flames. The helicopter was destroyed on impact by fire, leaving little recognizable. Debris was scattered across the area, and of course, all 3 of them were deceased. As per usual, the FAA and NTSB launched an investigation into the crash. Their preliminary findings confirmed the pilot's lack of proper certification and details of the flight timeline. Investigators also noted that Jared had logged hours in the aircraft type and had night flight experience, but not under conditions that would have met FAA requirements. The full report, which is coming soon, will look at mechanical factors, pilot decision-making, and any other contributing elements. For now, investigators point to one unavoidable fact. This flight should not have happened under federal regulations. This is truly a sad one. This entry is a super short one, but it's something I've had in my possible topic list for so long, and I don't even know where or how I found it, especially considering it only has 1,600 views in 14 years. Sometimes I just make myself laugh because I find so many of these things every day, and when I go lower into my topic list, it almost looks like someone else made it. Anyways, the video we're discussing was made by a channel called Soapisms, which has a whopping 3 subscribers, and this particular video is about a voicemail that they received. In this bizarre recording, it almost sounds like the voice is saying grandpa. But what makes this creepy is that the individual recording had actually lost their grandfather at 101 years old just a few months prior to this incident. And I know it's sort of a gimmicky entry, these things could easily be fabricated, but I'd be lying if I said that this audio didn't spook me a little bit, especially given the context. Check it out.
Saved message. Saved message.
As for the channel itself, it only has 3 videos. This and 2 other ones that are of orbs they recorded in their home. So it's very possible this person was just going through one of those paranormal phases. They could have made this up. I don't know, and I don't think we'll ever find out. But I do find this audio very unnerving, and I thought it was worth making a short entry about. It's also so characteristic of YouTube at the time. You've got the Windows Movie Maker scrolling text, the super small channel that promises more videos, only to fall into obscurity and likely even be forgotten by the owner themselves. It's just a creepy one, and you know I love anything from this time on YouTube. So full transparency, this is a very complex and heavy historic event that happened in a country that I'm not from, and so before I describe this disturbing video to you, I'm going to do my best at giving you a breakdown on this conflict in an objective way, but if any details are not accurate, I implore any of my Indonesian viewers to correct me and give me more context if they feel the need to. In February of 2001, one of the worst outbreaks of ethnic violence in modern Indonesia took place. The world would come to know it as the Sampit Conflict, and it was an absolutely brutal event that left hundreds deceased and entire communities destroyed. But to understand why this happened, we need to go back a little bit. In the decades leading up to this, the Indonesian government had a program designed to move families from crowded islands like Java and Madura to less populated regions. On paper, it was meant to reduce poverty and make use of unused land, but this ended up creating deep division. Indigenous groups in Borneo, known as Dayaks, saw this massive migration as a threat to their culture and land. One of the largest groups to move in were the Madurese people, and tensions between them and the Dayaks began to simmer almost immediately. By the late 1990s, there had already been violent clashes between the two communities. Lives were taken and there had already been a lot of destruction. Authorities tried to keep the peace, but of course the resentment never really went away, and it was only a matter of time before things were going to explode again. And of course, that moment came in the town of Sampit in February of 2001. The exact spark of this event is still debated, but what's certain is that a series of incidents triggered mass retaliation. Armed Dayak groups swept through communities where Madurese people lived. Entire streets were set on fire and people were dragged from their homes and attacked. The assaults were widespread and they were very tragic. Many Madurese victims were beheaded, and in some cases, reports documented acts of cannibalism during the attacks. And many Dayak people also lost their lives too. It went both ways. And that all brings me to the YouTube video that I opened up with. See, a commenter recommended this to me on my last video, and let's just say that their comment is 100% true. Footage of this event is indeed on YouTube, and you see absolutely everything. Of course, this is age restricted, and I won't be showing you anything, but it has some extremely harrowing clips in it. There's people holding heads, there's young ones who fell victim to this. It's just absolutely horrifying, but also demonstrates the reality of just how bad this event was, and I do not say that lightly. This video in particular is extremely low quality, watermarked, all that, but it almost makes it even more disturbing in some sense. Maybe that's just because it reminds me of seeing this sort of thing on the internet 2 decades ago, I don't know, but I would highly advise you not to seek this out. Within days of this conflict kicking off, the killings spread far beyond the original town. Thousands of homes were destroyed, main roads were blocked to prevent people from escaping, and anyone who tried to run risked being caught in the violence. It was complete chaos. The official death toll is in the hundreds, but some estimates put it closer to 1,000. Nearly 100,000 Madurese people were forced to flee, leaving everything behind as they boarded ships and evacuation convoys under military protection. Indonesian security forces eventually stepped in, but only after the worst of the violence had already happened. The government faced harsh criticism for being too slow to respond and for creating the very conditions that led to this tragedy in the first place. In the aftermath, peace talks and relocation programs followed, but for many survivors, the scars never healed. And to this day, most of the Madurese people who fled have never returned. The Sampit conflict is not often discussed these days internationally, so that's why I really wanted to touch on it. These videos are just terrifying. In 1954, in a small town just under 50 miles southeast of Birmingham, Alabama, things weren't exactly that eventful. It was mostly farmland, mills, quiet homes, that sort of thing. In this town was a 34-year-old woman named Anne Elizabeth Fowler Hodges, who rented a simple white farmhouse with her husband, Eugene. Anne was a very typical woman in that area for the time. She'd married young, gone through the war years, and settled into a very routine life with her husband, and on the morning of November 30th, she was simply doing what millions of others did. She was finishing chores around the house, maybe listening to the radio, looking after her yard, and then eventually she laid down on the living room couch after lunch for a nap. It was just before 1 p.m. at this point. But while Anne was asleep, something very serious was going on outside of the house, and unbeknownst to her, everyone out there was in a frenzy. Eventually though, there was a loud bang followed by some slight pain in her side that abruptly woke up Anne from her nap. And at the same time, her mother rushed into the room panicking. Anne was super confused, and immediately she just had this feeling that something was wrong. She was in pain, and now her mother was here freaking out. And sure enough, when she sat up, she noticed a hole right in the ceiling above the couch. There was wood and insulation littering the floor, their Philco radio that sat nearby was damaged, and on the carpet there was this object about the size of a grapefruit. Initially they thought the chimney had collapsed, but when they picked up this object, everything was going to change. Within hours, they'd figured it out. That grapefruit-sized object on the floor was a meteorite. It turns out that she would become the first confirmed person in modern history to be struck directly by a meteorite, and also Anne survived. She didn't even go to the hospital until the next day, and that was because she couldn't sleep. The meteorite just left a giant bruise on her upper thigh and hand. While Anne was asleep for her nap, a fireball streaked across 3 states. People in Mississippi and Georgia reported seeing it. In Alabama, where Anne was, it was so bright that some people thought a plane had exploded mid-air. A sonic boom followed that was so loud that it rattled windows and woke up Anne. The object on the ground was obviously the rock, and it weighed about 8.5 pounds. Anne survived this with a massive bruise on her hip, but no broken bones. The photograph revealing the bruise on her side made front pages across the country. When word got around, scientists were absolutely stunned, to say the least. I mean, at this point, NASA didn't even exist yet, and so space research was really in its infancy. Officials from the US Air Force quickly took possession of the rock and confirmed that it was a meteorite. Of course, what makes this so insane is just how rare it was. Meteorites hit Earth all the time, but the odds of one going through a roof and hitting a person directly were unfathomably low. And at the time, Anne became a household name. Reporters were swarming the small town, but weirdly, the story didn't stop with the impact. A weird legal fight erupted over who owned the meteorite. Because the rock had fallen through a rental property, the landlord, Birdie Guy, claimed it belonged to her. Every time, guys, I swear, every video, there's somebody with an insane name. Birdie Guy. Thankfully, the Hodges family fought back, arguing that it was theirs, and after weeks of dispute, even though the landlord won the legal rights, he later gave the rock back to the Hodges family in a gesture of goodwill. So basically, he just started a problem that didn't need to ever happen. The couple kept it for years but never made money from it, and eventually, they donated it to the Alabama Museum of Natural History, where it remains today. As for Anne, the sudden fame wasn't something she enjoyed. She really just lived a quiet life afterwards and passed away in 1972 at the age of 52. Rest in peace to these awesome people. Okay, so if you've been on the internet for a while, you've probably seen this video at some point before. If you haven't, you'll see it, don't worry, but I'm not going to focus so much on the video itself today. More just the fact that, from what I can tell, nobody actually knows the real backstory. Everyone is adamant that they do know the backstory. They'll link early sources or say, no, it comes from this location, but even those very sources are already claiming the story is alleged, or using words like apparently, and referring to random foreign articles from untrustworthy sources. I'll get into this, but let me brief you on the video again first and the most accepted narrative of its origin. The video was filmed in June of 2014 on Sakhalin Island, just off the coast of Russia, by a group of construction workers who were taking a break inside a wooden shed. Things were otherwise going as usual, but the men were laughing as they watched a scene unfold just outside. One of the workers pulled out his camera, pointing it towards this scene where a dog from their crew was standing off with a bear cub. At first, the men were joking a bit and clearly entertained by the unexpected encounter. The cub then inched forward and retreated, and it was just a funny back and forth, but it was one that even if you haven't seen this, you probably know where it's going. Because where there's a cub, there's usually a mother, and sure enough, from behind the slope, a second head appeared, and it was another cub. It pressed closer too, and I think this is probably where the men realized what was happening. Slowly, a massive mother bear emerged, lumbering uphill with her head low and her eyes fixed on this little wooden structure where the workers sat. At this point, I can only imagine the men were absolutely terrified. The camera kept rolling for a bit as the bear moved closer, and then, without warning, she charges at them full speed. The workers panic, and the video ends just as the bear reaches them. And the outcome of this was just about as bad as one could expect. According to reports from around that same time, so June of 2014, 3 construction workers were killed in this attack and 2 more were left in critical condition. And I haven't been able to find any information on the dog, but we hope he's okay. When the clip hit the internet, it went viral almost instantly, getting millions of views in just days, and I remember this very clearly. Even since then, I've seen it once every few years, and every single time, even from the beginning, it always came with the same questions. The first question being, is this even real? Some outlets suggested parts of the attack were staged, but I think sheer common sense can rule this one out. Even if they somehow train this wild bear, it has cubs. There's almost no way this encounter is fake, but where most of the questions come in is regarding whether or not the backstory is true. Again, there are very few reliable articles that directly connect this to any names or any specific location in Sakhalin. And sources like the Mirror already were questioning the authenticity of the articles that claimed 3 people passed and 2 were critically injured. There's a chance I just haven't been able to track this down, but I dug pretty deep, and every thread regarding this has the same cycle of questions. Basically, did 3 people actually pass as a result of this? There's some articles I've seen on Reddit threads that connect this to certain aftermath photos that were really horrible, and it was claiming that they were from this event, but again, the location in that article did not line up with the story. I've also seen this comment word for word on many videos and posts. No one died there. The scene of action was not in Sakhalin, but in this field in the north of this region, near Yakutia. The bear only scared the workers. They fled to the trailers. The dog, Pluto, a local old-timer, had been there since he was a puppy and was not injured. And I hope this is true, but again, with this comment, I'm not seeing any clear proof anywhere. As much as I want this to be true, it seems this may have originated from a direct Russian to English translation under the comments of the Russian video, and people started spreading it elsewhere. So it could very well be true. Or it could be a rumor that someone made up. We still don't know, and this is the internet after all. Something in favor of the official story is that there were reports out of Sakhalin Island around the time of bear attacks that did turn deadly. Around that time, Russian media reported a surge in bear encounters across the region, and wildlife authorities even called it a spate of bear-related violence. 3 bears were even shot and killed following the incidents, and 2 of them were on Sakhalin Island. But again, the stories don't line up with these people passing. The bears killed were on an attack of someone trying to pet it and just livestock. And that's really all I have. Maybe there's something I'm getting wrong here. Perhaps there is a clear answer somewhere, and honestly, I hope there's some piece of information that somehow I just missed this whole time. Maybe someone has gotten to the bottom of this and I just haven't seen it, and if that's the case, please let me know. It's been bothering me for a decade now, so take this entry as me simply documenting my confusion in real time. That's going to do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And as usual, if you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing. This was absolutely my biggest project yet, guys. Like, in the past week, I think I counted that I spent 60 to 70 hours on it just since last Sunday. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. I'm not going to make every video 40 minutes plus from this point on, but I do want to aim for something like 25 to 30. But nonetheless, I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll see you very soon.